What could make Judge Frank Caprio stop in the middle of a sentence, take off his glasses, and fight back tears in a courtroom that has seen every excuse, every lie, and every last-second apology imaginable? Before you decide this 82-year-old veteran was just another stubborn man trying to dodge the law, hit that subscribe button if you believe justice should hear the whole story. Because what started as a simple traffic hearing in Providence turned into the kind of moment people remember for years. At 9:14 on a gray Thursday morning, March 14, 2024, case number PMC 24-1187 was called inside the Providence Municipal Court, and the man at the center of it looked like trouble. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from if you've ever seen someone judged before they spoke a single word. He wore a Navy Ralph Lauren windbreaker zipped all the way to his chin, faded khaki slacks pressed with military precision, scuffed New Balance 990s, and a silver Timex on a wrist that still looked strong enough to wrench a bolt loose. He stood next to the defense table with his jaw set so hard it looked painful. Like this video, if you believe the proudest people are sometimes the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. His name was Frank Deluca, 82 years old, a Vietnam veteran, widower, retired RIPTA bus mechanic, and according to the stack of citations in front of the clerk, a man who had racked up 8 parking violations, 1 expired inspection ticket, and 1 allegation of unlawfully displaying a disabled placard that no longer belonged on his windshield. The room was already leaning against him. Maria Lopes, the court clerk, adjusted her glasses and read the charges in a clear, practiced voice. Share this with someone who needs to see how fast appearances can fool a room. The dates fell one after another like hammer blows. October 28, November 3, November 22, December 14, January 6, January 19, February 2, February 27. Same car almost every time. A 2010 Buick Lucerne, dark green, Rhode Island plate 432 XJQ. Across the aisle stood Linda Mercer from the City Enforcement Division, wearing a black Calvin Klein blazer and a face that suggested she had no interest in tears, medals, or stories. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Some people know how to weaponize calm better than anger. The city's position is straightforward, she said. Mr. Deluca repeatedly ignored posted restrictions, accumulated unpaid citations, and on at least 1 documented occasion blocked a clearly marked emergency access zone. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. Frank exhaled through his nose and stared past her. Judge Caprio looked down from the bench, hands folded, expression neutral. That was always the unsettling thing about him. He never rushed to judgment. He let the silence work first. Mr. Deluca, he said, do you understand the charges? I understand paper, Frank replied. I've had enough of it in my life. A few people in the gallery smirked. They thought they knew him already. Angry old man, uses his service like a shield, wants sympathy instead of responsibility. Linda Mercer slid a document across the podium. The city would also like to submit Officer Raymond Sloan's body cam footage from the January 19 incident and surveillance from Rhode Island Hospital dated November 22. That changed the air immediately. Because once people hear there's footage, they assume the truth is trapped inside a screen. Officer Daniel Ruiz, the bailiff, shifted near the side wall. He had worked that courtroom long enough to recognize the opening notes of a viral moment. Not yet, but close, very close. Judge Caprio nodded. We'll review the evidence. Frank leaned toward the microphone, voice rough and irritated. I'm not asking for favors. No one said you were, the judge replied. I'm not asking for mercy either. Judge Caprio held his gaze for a beat. Sometimes the people who need mercy most are the ones who refuse to ask for it. That line landed hard. You could hear 2 women in the second row whisper to each other. One wrote it down in the notes app on her phone. Everyone in the room felt it. The old man had walked in ready for a fight. The judge had just reminded him that not every battle was worth winning the same way. Then Maria clicked the remote. The first video came up on the courtroom monitor with the familiar tinny buzz of bad audio and fluorescent lighting. January 19, 2024, 7:42 a.m. Body cam. Officer Raymond Sloan stood beside Frank's Buick, parked along a red-painted curb outside St. Anne's Medical Plaza in South Providence. Rain dotted the windshield. Frank was on camera, shoulders squared, standing by the trunk with a white paper pharmacy bag in one hand. "Sir," Sloan said on the recording, "you can't leave this vehicle here. And I told you, I'll move it when I'm done. This is an emergency zone. It's a curb. You're obstructing access. I'm carrying medicine to a woman who can't walk. Then, use legal parking." "Sure," Frank snapped, looking straight at the officer. "You want her insulin on time, or you want me to circle the block for 20 minutes like a good citizen?" There were murmurs. The worst part was that he sounded exactly like the city wanted him to sound: sharp, bitter, entitled. Linda Mercer didn't even need to speak. The footage was doing her work. Officer Sloan's voice on the body cam stayed measured. "I'm issuing a citation." "Write what you want," Frank said. "Men half my age have pointed bigger things at me." That got an audible reaction. Not sympathy, not yet. It sounded like arrogance. Judge Caprio watched the screen, then looked back down. "Mr. Deluca, that's not helping you." Frank crossed his arms. Truth doesn't always help. If you've ever seen someone talk themselves deeper into a hole because pride won't let them stop, you know exactly what that room felt like. By the time the video ended, even the people who might have wanted to cut him a break were hardening. This was the outrage moment, the point where viewers lean in and say, "No, no, no, don't tell me this man is using his age and his uniform to bully everyone around him." Linda Mercer stepped forward. "The city is not unsympathetic to Mr. Deluca's age or service, but civic rules apply to everyone. We cannot have residents deciding that personal urgency gives them permission to block emergency lanes." Frank scoffed. "That's what this is about, paint on pavement." The gallery stiffened. A teenager in the back muttered, "Wow." Judge Caprio raised a hand. "Mr. Deluca, listen carefully. This court respects service. It also respects order. You'll have your chance. Use it wisely." Frank said nothing. The judge turned to the second piece of evidence. "Let's see the hospital footage." Maria clicked again. This time the camera angle came from high above a drop-off lane near Rhode Island Hospital. Date stamp, November 22, 2023. Time, 6:41 a.m. The footage was grainy, bluish, cold. Frank's Buick pulled up too close to the entrance, clearly over the line, clearly in a zone marked no standing. He got out fast, faster than anyone that age had a right to move, and opened the back door. At first it looked bad. Then the screen showed what the city hadn't bothered to explain. Frank lifted a small portable oxygen tank with one hand and offered the other to a woman in a floral blanket trying to swing her swollen legs out of the seat. She was thin, pale, and moving with the kind of pain that makes your whole body brace before it happens. Frank tucked the blanket around her knees, balanced the oxygen tubing, and half carried, half guided her to the sliding doors. The courtroom went quiet. No one whispered now. No one smirked. The old man on the screen wasn't parking for coffee. He wasn't running into a deli. He was getting a sick woman into a hospital before she collapsed. Linda Mercer cleared her throat. The city acknowledges he was transporting a passenger. The violation remains. But her voice had lost something. That's what happens when evidence stops behaving the way a prosecutor wants. Judge Caprio leaned back. "Who is the woman?" Frank's answer came slow. "Rosa Vega." "Related to you?" "No. Neighbor. Used to be." Why were you transporting her? Frank looked annoyed by the question itself, because she needed to go. Rosa Vega. One name, two words, but they hit that room like a stone dropped into deep water, because now the case wasn't simple anymore. And if there was one thing everyone knew about Judge Caprio, it was that once a case stopped being simple, he followed the human truth until it had nowhere left to hide. Hit that subscribe button if you can already tell this story is about to go somewhere no one in that courtroom expected. Linda Mercer tried to recover the ground she'd lost. Your Honor, even if Mr. Deluca occasionally assisted others, we are still looking at repeated violations across multiple dates and locations. This is not one emergency. This is ongoing disregard. She was right about one thing. There were too many tickets for one explanation. That was the hook inside the hook. Because by then, everyone had shifted from outrage to curiosity. Why would an 82-year-old widower with a temper, a dead placard on his windshield, and a car full of receipts keep doing this over and over? Judge Caprio folded his hands again. Mr. Deluca, do you wish to explain the pattern? Frank stared at the wood grain of the defense table. Not particularly. The judge gave the faintest smile, not amused but patient. That's not a legal strategy, that's a mood. A few people laughed. Frank didn't. Maria Lopes checked the file. Your Honor, the defendant has submitted 3 letters marked for identification, but he has not requested they be read. Judge Caprio looked down. Did you submit letters, Mr. Deluca? Frank gave a tiny nod. Why submit them if you don't want them read? Because Emily made me bring them. For the first time, he glanced toward the gallery. A girl in a navy cardigan, white blouse, and worn white keds sat in the second row clutching a spiral notebook against her chest so tightly her fingers had gone white. She couldn't have been older than 17. Dark hair in a loose braid, silver cross necklace, eyes already wet. That your daughter? Judge Caprio asked. Granddaughter. What's her name? Emily. And where's her mother? The question seemed to punch the air out of Frank's lungs. Gone, he said. No details, just gone. That one word rearranged the room again. Because grief recognizes grief, it doesn't need a full sentence. Judge Caprio nodded once. Ms. Mercer, before I consider disposition, I want to know more about the context of these dates. We'll hear the letters. Frank closed his eyes for a second, like a man bracing for whether he'd hoped would pass him by. Maria opened the first envelope. The paper crackled loud in the quiet courtroom. The letter was from Carla Mendes, RN, renal unit nurse, St. Anne's Medical Plaza, dated March 2, 2024. To whom it may concern, my name is Carla Mendes. I have personally seen Mr. Frank Deluca transport patients to dialysis appointments when contracted medical transportation failed to arrive. He has done this without payment, often before sunrise, and has waited outside for hours because several of these patients do not have family support. The room got still in a new way. Not pity, respect was starting to show up. Maria kept reading. On January 19, the date of one of the citations, Mr. Deluca brought medication to Rosa Vega after a delay at the pharmacy would likely have caused serious complications for a juvenile diabetic in her care, Malik Thompson, age 9. Malik Thompson, another name. Another life attached to the old man, everyone thought they had figured out. Frank shifted his weight, uncomfortable now, almost angry at the kindness being spoken aloud. His pride had been built for war, for loss, for work. Public praise felt like exposure. It made him look hunted. Linda Mercer stepped in. Your Honor, charitable conduct does not invalidate municipal law. Many people help others and still park legally. Frank turned toward her for the first time. Many people say they help. Mr. Deluca, Judge Caprio warned. The veteran's jaw flexed. He looked away. That was the first crack in him. Not a tear, not an apology, just exhaustion slipping through the pride for half a second. The second letter came from Luis Herrera, superintendent of a three-family building on Messer Street. He wrote that Frank had been taking groceries and prescriptions to residents after a winter boiler failure left several elderly tenants housebound. One of them was Rosa Vega, 71, recovering from a fractured hip and chronic heart failure. Another was Arthur Bell, 68, a veteran with a below-knee amputation and no car. The third letter was from Emily Deluca's guidance counselor at Classical High School. It described Frank as Emily's sole guardian and noted that he attended every school conference in the same green Buick, usually arriving early, carrying a brown thermos, always apologizing if his hands smelled like motor oil. The guidance counselor included a line that made people look at Frank differently. Mr. Deluca speaks very little about himself, but whenever Emily succeeds, he says the same thing. I'm just trying to keep my promises. Judge Caprio lowered his chin. What promises, Mr. Deluca? Frank's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He didn't answer. And just when it seemed like the room had softened enough for him to step into the truth, Linda Mercer reached for the one fact that could drag everything back into suspicion. Your Honor, she said, there is still the matter of the disabled placard. Everything stopped. Even Frank looked like he'd been waiting for that blow and hating himself for knowing it was coming. Mercer held up a photocopy. Placard number RIDP 77143 was registered to Elena Deluca, deceased April 8, 2023. It was observed displayed in the defendant's vehicle during at least 3 citations after her death. That is not a clerical issue. That is misuse. A gasp moved through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. This was the shock beat, the part where sympathy stumbles. Because now the questions got ugly again. Was all that helping just cover? Was the old man really using his dead wife's placard to game the system? Had the courtroom fallen for a performance? Judge Caprio looked at Frank carefully. Is that true? Frank didn't speak. Mr. Deluca, the judge said more softly, is that placard your late wife's? Frank swallowed once. Yes. Did you continue displaying it after her death? Yes. Maria Lope stopped typing for a second. Linda Mercer's expression sharpened. She had her footing back. Why? Judge Caprio asked. Frank's face changed, but only a little. The anger stayed. What shifted underneath it was older, redder, more dangerous because it hurt deeper. Because I couldn't take it down. The courtroom said nothing. Mercer moved in, couldn't or didn't want to. Frank didn't even look at her. My wife sat in that front seat for 18 years after her knees went. She used that placard every time I took her to Miriam, Rhode Island, Kent. Anywhere anybody said there might be one more medicine, one more specialist, one more thing that could slow down what Alzheimer's was doing to her. He paused, breath rough. After she died, that placard was still folded in the visor where she left it. So no, counselor, I didn't take it down. I'd already taken down the hospital bracelet. I'd already taken down the shower chair. I'd already taken down the pill organizer, and the coat she forgot was hers. I had one thing left in that car that still looked like her hand might reach for it. Nobody moved. Not Judge Caprio, not Maria, not Linda Mercer. You could hear the heating system click on in the wall. It was the first time Frank stopped sounding arrogant and started sounding human. Raw human. The kind that doesn't know how to grieve publicly because survival trained him to turn every feeling into steel. Judge Caprio spoke carefully. Did you use that placard to seek parking privileges for yourself? Frank's eyes stayed on the floor. No. Did you know you should have surrendered it? Yes. Then why not? Frank let out a laugh so small and broken it barely qualified. Because the day I did that, I'd have to admit she wasn't coming back. There it was. The moment of realization. The shift in dialogue. The old warrior who walked in sounding, combative, suddenly sounded like a widower drowning in objects. Like this video, if you believe grief can make good people do foolish things. Linda Mercer regained her voice. Your Honor, emotional attachment does not legalize a placard. No one said it did, Judge Caprio replied. And that one line changed the balance again. Because this is where people misunderstand compassion. It doesn't erase facts, it expands them. Frank still had violations. He still had choices to answer for. But now the room could see the shape of the man inside the record. And that shape was getting more complicated with every minute. Judge Caprio asked for a brief recess. The gavel tapped once, not hard, just enough. The courtroom breathed. People turned in their seats and whispered. The woman who had smirked earlier now looked embarrassed. A younger man near the back searched Frank Deluca on his phone, probably trying to see if he had some heroic background that would simplify all of this. But nothing about that room was simple anymore. Officer Daniel Ruiz walked to the side table and offered Frank a paper cup of water. Frank didn't take it. Suit yourself, Ruiz said quietly. But for what it's worth, sir, I don't think anybody in here sees you the same way they did 20 minutes ago. Frank stared ahead. That doesn't improve parking laws. No, Ruiz said, but it changes what people think justice looks like. Emily stood and approached her grandfather. Up close, she looked so young it hurt. 17 going on 30, the way only kids carrying adult worry ever do. You should tell him, she whispered. Frank kept his gaze fixed forward. No. You promised me. I promised you school, food, lights on, not this. Grandpa. I said no. She bit her lip hard enough to blanch it. Then she sat down again, eyes shining. And if that had been the end of it, it still would have been memorable. An old man, a dead wife, a placard he couldn't surrender, enough for tears, enough for comments, enough for a clip to spread. But what happened after the recess was the reason millions would have watched this story and felt their chests tighten. Because Maria Lopes came back with one more item from the city's file. A handwritten note from Officer Sloan. Not part of the charges, just a supplemental observation. It said the defendant's vehicle had been seen parked overnight more than once near St. Anne's Shelter Annex and behind the Veteran Outreach Center on Broad Street. Personal effects visible through rear window. Blanket, thermos, small duffel. Judge Caprio read it once. Then again. Then he looked up. Mr. Deluca, he said, voice lower now, where are you living? Frank's face went blank. And suddenly, everyone in that room understood there was a much bigger secret hiding behind those citations than anyone had imagined. Drop a comment telling us the moment you realized this case was no longer about parking tickets. Frank didn't answer right away. He just stood there with the stillness of a man who had spent too many years surviving by never letting anyone see where the roof leaked. Judge Caprio repeated the question, where are you living, sir? At home. Linda Mercer glanced at her papers. The address on file is 214 Messer Street, second floor. Emily looked down fast. The judge noticed. He noticed everything. Ms. Deluca, he said gently, is that where you and your grandfather live? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Frank turned sharply. Emily, don't. Judge Caprio leaned forward. No one is trying to embarrass anyone, but this court cannot do justice in the dark. That line hung there like a light switch nobody wanted flipped. Emily's hands shook around her notebook. I live there. And your grandfather. She looked at him. He looked back with something fiercer than anger, fear, naked fear. That was new. The kind that doesn't come from punishment, the kind that comes from being seen. He stays with me, Emily said finally. Judge Caprio's eyes moved from her to Frank. Stays with you or lives there? Emily's throat worked, mostly. The judge nodded slowly, as if the partial truth told him more than a full lie could have. He didn't press, not yet. Instead, he called the next witness Linda Mercer had listed, Officer Raymond Sloan. Sloan took the stand in a clean blue uniform, younger than most people expected, maybe 36, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, professional without swagger. He didn't come off cruel. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable being cast as the villain. He testified to the dates, locations, and posted restrictions. He described Frank as non-compliant but not physically aggressive. He confirmed that on January 19 Frank had been carrying medication. He confirmed that on November 22 he had assisted Rosa Vega with oxygen. Then Judge Caprio asked the question that mattered. Officer Sloan, in your professional opinion, was this defendant acting for personal convenience? Sloan hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. No, Your Honor, he said, not usually. Not usually. There were multiple incidents where I believed he was trying to help someone, but he refused to explain. He got defensive fast, and after repeated citations, I had to assume he was making his own rules. Frank muttered, because your rules don't always show up on time. Sloan turned toward him. Maybe not, but when you won't tell anyone what's going on, you make it hard to help you. There it was again. Another shareable truth. The law sees what you did. People only understand why when you let them. Judge Caprio let the silence settle between them. Mr. Deluca, do you hear that? Frank nodded once. Do you accept any responsibility for how this escalated? A long pause. Then, reluctantly, yes. The word was small, but it mattered. It was the first genuine step away from arrogance and toward humility. The judge looked at Sloan. Did you ever believe Mr. Deluca posed a danger? Sloan thought carefully. I believe the parking behavior could create danger, yes, but as a person, no. I believed he was angry. I also believed he was carrying more than he was willing to say. That answer earned respect, not because it excused Frank, because it told the truth without stripping him of dignity. Judge Caprio thanked the officer and dismissed him. Then he called, unexpectedly, for the letters to be supplemented with live testimony if the witnesses were present. Carla Mendes stood from the gallery. She wore teal scrubs under a black winter coat, her ID badge still clipped to her chest. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were already bright. I'm a renal nurse, she said, and I'm here because the court should know what Mr. Deluca has been doing for months. She explained that after a private transportation contractor repeatedly failed dialysis patients in low-income neighborhoods, Frank started taking names down on an old legal pad. Tuesdays for Rosa Vega, Thursdays for Arthur Bell, alternate Fridays for Mrs. Kim on Cranston Street. He wasn't on any payroll. He wasn't part of any nonprofit. He just showed up. How often? Judge Caprio asked. 3, 4, sometimes 5 mornings a week. Why? Carla glanced at Frank and smiled sadly. Ask him, and he'll tell you everyone else was busy. A soft laugh moved through the room. Then Carla added the detail that made it hurt. He keeps spare blankets in the back seat. He warms them over the dashboard vents before patients get in when it's cold. I know because I saw him do it for Rosa in January. His own hands were blue. Frank looked furious at being talked about like this, which told you all you needed to know about the kind of man he was. Some people hide wrongdoing. He hid goodness because he thought naming it would cheapen it. Judge Caprio asked, did he ever accept money? Never. Did he ever ask for recognition? Carla gave a tired little laugh. He'd probably rather take another ticket. That one got the whole room. Even Frank almost smiled. Carla continued. On January 19, the medication officer Sloan mentioned wasn't for Rosa. It was for Rosa's grandson, Malik Thompson, age 9, type 1 diabetes. His mother works nights at a laundry plant in Warwick. The pharmacy computer had glitched. Mr. Deluca sat there until they fixed it, then drove it over himself. Linda Mercer stood. Oh. Objection to narrative. Judge Caprio shook his head. Overruled. This is directly relevant to context. Mercer sat, but only barely. Carla finished with one sentence nobody forgot. The city saw repeat violations. We saw repeat rescue. That was one of those quotes that sounds written by a screenwriter, except in moments like this. Truth often beats fiction by being simpler. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that line belongs on every courtroom clip in America. Next came Rosa Vega. Officer Ruiz helped her to the witness area with her oxygen line tucked neatly behind one ear. She wore a burgundy coat buttoned wrong and clutched a folded tissue in her left hand. Her fractured hip had healed badly. Every step announced itself. "Mrs. Vega," Judge Caprio said, "take your time." She nodded. "I always do now." A little laugh, a little pain. She explained that Frank had lived 2 doors down before his wife died. After Alina Deluca's funeral, he started checking on neighbors more often, not less. He fixed Rosa's broken lock, carried her groceries, put salt down when the steps iced over, drove her to cardiology when her son in Florida stopped answering. "What happened on November 22? The judge asked. Rosa dabbed her eyes. "I couldn't breathe good. He got me in the car. I told him to just leave me at the door, but he don't do halfway with people. He carried the oxygen and scolded me the whole time." The room smiled. "What did he say?" Judge Caprio asked. Rosa's face softened. He said, "You're not dying in my back seat, Rosa. The upholstery's older than your attitude." That broke the tension enough for people to laugh out loud. Even Judge Caprio laughed. Frank muttered, "I said what I said." Then Rosa turned serious. "This man never asked me for a thing, not once. When my hip broke, I couldn't get in the tub. He bought me a shower chair from a yard sale and scrubbed it himself. He brought soup. He argued with my landlord. He yelled at a delivery boy for leaving groceries on the bottom step." "Did you know about the tickets?" the judge asked. She nodded. "I offered to help pay. He got offended." Frank looked away. "Why?" the judge asked him. Frank's answer came instantly. "Because she's on oxygen." That line hit harder than a speech would have. Because morality, when it's real, is often blunt. Rosa's lips trembled. "He told me, you keep your money for breathing." At that, a woman in the gallery actually covered her mouth. This was no longer schadenfreude. This was empathy in full swing. The audience that once wanted to watch an arrogant old man get humbled was now discovering something richer. He was being humbled, yes, but by love, by grief, by the evidence of a life lived in private service. And still, the biggest turn hadn't arrived. Judge Caprio thanked Rosa and asked if anyone else wished to be heard. Arthur Bell stood next. 68. Denim jacket, metal prosthetic visible under his pant leg. Army veteran. He described how Frank had driven him to prosthetics appointments when the shuttle didn't show, and once changed a flat tire in freezing rain without even taking off his church shoes. "Church shoes?" the judge asked. Arthur nodded. Black Florsham loafers, slipped all over the damn pavement, still did it. Another laugh. Then Arthur said, "I know what war does to a man after the cameras leave. Frank ain't loud because he thinks he's special. Frank's loud because silence is where his ghosts live." You could have heard a paperclip drop after that. Judge Caprio looked at Frank with fresh eyes. "Is that true?" Frank stared ahead. "I don't discuss ghosts in public." "No," the judge said softly. "I imagine you don't." Then came the choice moment. Judge Caprio could have stopped there, made a ruling based on sympathy and partial evidence, and everyone would have understood. But he didn't, because real justice doesn't stop at the first emotional answer. It keeps digging until it can stand on solid ground. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "you mentioned a repeated pattern. Is there additional evidence tied to the remaining dates?" Linda Mercer nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and it changes the picture. There is surveillance from Providence Children's Hospital dated December 14, along with a written incident summary from security." The entire room tightened again. There it was. But wait, there's more. The twist after the softening. Because if the city had held that footage back until now, then they believed it could still damage Frank in a serious way. Maria brought it up on the screen. December 14, 2023, 8:03 p.m. Frank's Buick pulled into a red-striped access lane outside the pediatric emergency entrance. This time there was no elderly passenger, no oxygen tank, no visible emergency transport need. Frank got out holding a stuffed brown bear in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. He was moving fast, almost limping, and his face, even in grainy security footage, looked wrong. Too pale, too focused, too tend. He disappeared through the automatic doors. Then he was gone for 6 minutes. 6 full minutes in a pediatric emergency lane. The gallery reacted all over again. That was enough time to trigger real outrage. Even Judge Caprio's expression changed. 6 minutes was not a quick assist, that was a choice. Linda Mercer stepped into the opening. Security's written report notes that staff requested the vehicle be moved, and Mr. Deluca was not immediately reachable. This is the citation the city views as most serious. Frank closed his eyes. Emily started crying quietly in the second row. Judge Caprio saw it. "Ms. Deluca, were you involved in this incident?" She shook her head no. The judge looked back to Frank. "Who were you bringing that bear to?" Frank did not answer. "Was it your granddaughter?" "No." "A relative?" "No." "Then who?" Frank's hands trembled once, just once, before he clenched them into fists. Nobody in the room realized it yet, but they were standing on the edge of the real story. The one hidden under the placard, under the tickets, under the stubbornness, under the veteran's pride. And when it came out, it would hit like a detonation. Like this video, if you've ever felt that a person's hardest truth usually comes right after they say, "I don't want to talk about it." Judge Caprio lowered his voice, almost to a father's tone. "Mr. Deluca, if I'm going to do right by this case, I need the truth." Frank opened his eyes and looked at the screen, not the judge. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but now it sounded tired enough to break. "The child's name is Lily Barnes." No one recognized it. Not the judge, not Mercer, not Maria, not the gallery. "She's 8, he said. "Seizure disorder. Sometimes the meds don't hold." "Who is she to you?" Judge Caprio asked. Frank's throat moved. "Nothing," he said. Emily let out a soft sob. The judge glanced at her. "That's not true, is it?" Frank turned toward her sharply. "Emily." But Emily had already stood up. "She's not nothing," she said, voice shaking. "He pays for her medicine." It was as if the room had fallen through the floor. Linda Mercer blinked. "Pays for whose medicine?" Emily pressed the notebook against her chest. "Lily Barnes. He takes her to appointments. He buys her winter clothes. He says it's temporary every time, but it's not temporary. He's been doing it for more than a year." Judge Caprio held up a hand, stunned but steady. "Ms. Deluca, sit if you need to, but tell me only what you know." Emily stayed standing. "I know because I found the receipts in the glove box. I know because I saw the envelopes. I know because he lies badly when he's tired." A few people let out breathy, disbelieving laughs through their tears. Judge Caprio asked the only question left. "Who is Lily Barnes?" Frank shut his eyes again, and when he opened them, the room met a different man than the one who had walked in. Same face, same spine, same old windbreaker, but the shield was cracking. "Lily Barnes," he said slowly, "is the daughter of the man who killed my son." The courtroom exploded into sound. Gasps, a dropped pen, somebody whispering, "Oh my God." Maria Lopes actually stopped typing. Linda Mercer's mouth parted and stayed there. Officer Ruiz looked from Frank to Emily and back like he'd misheard it and needed the world to repeat itself. Judge Caprio did not speak for several seconds. Because some truths are so heavy the room needs time just to make space for them. Frank continued before anyone could interrupt, as if the only way to get through it was to keep moving. "My son Michael was 34, carpenter. Big laugh. Better baseball arm than he ever had a chance to brag about. On June 17, 2011, he was driving home on Route 10 after finishing a deck job in Cranston. A drunk crossed the line. His name was Paul Barnes." He swallowed. "Michael died before I got to Rhode Island Hospital." The air in that courtroom changed from emotion to devastation. Not performative devastation. Not dramatic because someone raised their voice. Devastation because the simplest facts are often the cruelest. A son, a road, a drunk driver, a father who arrived too late. Frank looked at his hands. Paul Barnes got 7 years, did 4 and some change, came out worse than he went in, died of an overdose 2 years later, left behind a little girl and a woman working double shifts. No one moved. "And you helped them?" Judge Caprio asked, voice barely above a whisper. Frank gave one bitter nod. "No," he corrected. "I helped her, the little girl, not him." "Why?" That was the question hanging in every chest. Why would a man bury his son, then spend his old age helping the child of the man who caused it? Frank's answer was the kind people clip, replay, and never forget. Because she didn't drink and drive. There are lines that make a room emotional. And there are lines that stop time. That one stopped time. Even Linda Mercer lowered her eye. Judge Caprio removed his glasses. He wasn't crying yet, but he was close enough that the whole room knew it. Frank kept going, maybe because once a man opens the locked room inside him, he either empties it or gets buried in it. Lily started having seizures last year. Her mother, Angela, works nights at a diner on Atwell's and mornings cleaning offices downtown. She missed one appointment because the bus broke down and social services gave her a new date 3 months later. So I drove them. Then again. Then again. Then the prescriptions got expensive, and I had some money left from a leaner's life insurance and Michael's old tool sale, so. His voice broke. He stopped. The room could hear Emily crying openly now. Judge Caprio leaned forward, eyes wet. "Why keep this secret?" Frank laughed once, broken and embarrassed. "What was I supposed to do? Walk around town telling people I'm saint of the year? My son's dead. My wife's dead. The little girl is alive. That's the math." That quote hit like thunder. My son's dead. My wife's dead. The little girl is alive. That's the math. Share this with someone who still believes the strongest people are the ones who choose kindness when bitterness would be easier. Angela Barnes had been sitting in the back the whole time. Nobody had noticed her because grief doesn't always arrive dressed for attention. She wore a supermarket fleece, hair pulled back, hands red from work, and when she stood, she looked like she might collapse under the weight of what she was about to say. "Your Honor," she said, voice shaking, "may I speak?" Judge Caprio nodded carefully. Angela stepped forward. "I didn't want to come because Mr. Deluca told me not to. He said this court didn't need my mess. But the truth is, my daughter would not be stable right now without him." She held up a folder with pharmacy printouts, appointment cards, and a handwritten note clipped to the front. "When Lily's father died, we had nothing. And I know what Paul Barnes did. I know whose son he took from this man. I know I don't deserve what he's done for us." Frank looked furious. Angela. She ignored him. He brought a teddy bear to the ER that night because Lily had bitten through the old one during a seizure. He slept in the waiting room chair until 3 in the morning because I was working a shift I couldn't lose. He paid a copay when I lied and said I had it covered. He leaves grocery bags on our porch and says the supermarket got confused. A few people laughed through tears. Angela's next words shattered what was left of Frank's privacy. "I asked him once why he was helping us. He told me, 'I lost my boy. I'm not letting your girl get buried by his father's sin too.'" By then, even Officer Ruiz was blinking hard. This was the compassion beat, the unexpected mercy moment, the point where the room realized it had not just misjudged a defendant, it had nearly reduced a remarkable moral act to a parking problem. Judge Caprio set his glasses down on the bench and pressed his fingertips to his mouth. Everyone saw it. Everyone in the room knew this was one of those moments people would talk about outside the courthouse, in family group chats, over dinner tables, on clips that would rack up views because the truth was too powerful to ignore. But still, somehow, there was more. Because the story of Frank Deluca was not only about what he had given, it was also about what it had cost. Linda Mercer, to her credit, didn't grandstand. When she stood again, her voice was different. "Mr. Deluca," she said, "did your assistance to Ms. Barnes and these other residents contribute to your inability to pay the citations?" Frank answered plainly now, no edge, no performance. "Yes." "And to maintain your granddaughter's household?" "Yes." "And to the repeated use of your vehicle for emergency transport?" "Yes." She hesitated. "The city file contains observations suggesting you may have been sleeping in your vehicle. Is that true?" Emily covered her face. Frank said nothing. Judge Caprio spoke softly. "Mr. Deluca, I'm asking you directly. Is it true?" A long pause. Then finally, "Sometimes." That single word broke the room all over again. Because now the secret had layers. He wasn't just helping the child of the man who killed his son. He wasn't just driving sick neighbors and paying for medication. He was doing it while falling apart financially enough to sleep in a Buick behind shelters and outreach centers, so his granddaughter could keep believing home was still home. Judge Caprio's voice was almost tender. "Why?" Frank answered without looking up. "Because Emily had SAT prep on Saturdays, because she needed internet for school, because rent went up after the plumbing got fixed, because Lily's medicine got more expensive in December, because Arthur needed a copay for a new socket, because Rose's landlord wanted cash, because every time I thought I'd catch up, somebody smaller than me had a bigger problem." That line landed. D like scripture. Somebody smaller than me had a bigger problem. Like this video, if you believe that's one of the deepest definitions of character you've ever heard. Emily stood again, tears streaking her face, and this time Judge Caprio didn't stop her. "He sold his side of the duplex in October," she said. "He told me he was refinancing. He's been keeping enough in the account so the rent at my place looks automatic. He sleeps there some nights, but other nights he says he's at Arthur's or Rose's or helping someone late. He's been sleeping in the car behind the outreach center because they let veterans park without towing." Frank looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Judge Caprio asked quietly, "Why hide that from her?" Frank turned toward Emily for the first time in several minutes. When he spoke, every ounce of hardness in him had become something else. "Because she's 17, he said. "Because she already buried a mother. Because I wasn't going to let her spend senior year wondering whether the lights would stay on. Because children are supposed to study for algebra, not homelessness." The gallery gave up pretending to be composed. People were crying openly now. Even Linda Mercer was dabbing beneath one eye with the side of her finger while pretending she was. And then Emily did something nobody expected. She walked to the podium and handed Maria Lopes a folded letter. "My grandmother left this in her recipe box," she said. "He doesn't know I brought it." Frank's head snapped up. "Emily, it's time." Judge Caprio looked to Frank. "Do I have permission?" Frank stared at his granddaughter. She stared back through tears and fear and love. Then he exhaled the longest breath of the morning and gave one defeated nod. Maria opened the letter. It was written in shaky cursive on lined paper, dated February 3, 2023, 2 months before Deluca died. "Frank, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone or too far gone to argue with you properly. So listen anyway. Do not become one of those men who confuses pain with duty. I know you. You will try to save everyone and tell no one. You will say that's honor. Sometimes it's just loneliness dressed up in boots." The courtroom was dead silent. Maria kept reading, voice trembling now. "Take care of Emily first. And if life ever puts someone helpless in front of you, do not ask whose fault it is before you help them. Mercy is not weakness. It's the last proof that pain did not make you cruel." Judge Caprio bowed his head. Frank's face folded in on itself. Not dramatically, not like movies. It was quieter than that, more devastating. An old man hearing his wife tell the truth from beyond the year he lost her. Maria read the final line. "If you ever have to choose between looking strong and being kind, choose kind. The world has enough strong men." Frank sat down hard in the chair behind him as if his knees had been cut out. Emily dropped beside him, grabbing his hand. He didn't resist. For the first time all morning he looked his age, not because he was weak, because he was tired enough to stop performing strength. That was the emotional breakdown. The breakthrough, too. Judge Caprio took off his glasses fully and reached for a tissue. No one in the room pretended not to notice. He dabbed once at his eye and let the silence breathe instead of covering it with procedure. Then he said the line that would have been clipped, captioned, replayed, and quoted by millions. "The law sees what you did," he said. "Mercy asks why you did it. And today, Mr. Deluca, the why matters." That was pure Judge Caprio. Calm, wise, powerful, not theatrical, just true. Linda Mercer stood one final time, but now there was no steel in her, only honesty. "Your Honor, the city does not withdraw its concern about emergency access zones. Those rules exist for a reason. But in light of the testimony, the surrounding circumstances, and the extraordinary moral context now before the court, the city would defer to the court's discretion." It was as close to surrender as she could professionally make it. Justice served doesn't always look like one side being humiliated. Sometimes it looks like one side recognizing humanity and stepping back from ego. Judge Caprio nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Mercer." Then he addressed Frank directly. "Mr. Deluca, I need you to hear two things at the same time. First, what you did for these people, Rosa, Arthur, Malik, Lily, is extraordinary. Second, extraordinary motives do not make emergency lanes safe. If an ambulance had been delayed, we would be having a different conversation." Frank nodded immediately. "I know. No excuses. No. Do you understand now that pride made this worse?" Frank looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Yes." "Say it louder so the part of you still trying to salute instead of heel can hear it." A soft, tearful laugh rippled through the courtroom. Frank took a breath. "Yes, Your Honor, pride made it worse." That was the humility T. Earn the story needed. Not humiliation. Humility. A proud man admitting that even noble intentions can become dangerous when they refuse help. Judge Caprio glanced at the file. "Here is my ruling. The citations related to meter and standing violations that occurred in the course of verified medical transport and emergency assistance are dismissed in the interest of justice." Gasps, then relief. The citation relating to unlawful display of the disabled placard is reduced to a non-moving administrative violation with no finding of fraudulent intent, based on the credible testimony regarding grief and lack of exploitative use. Frank lowered his head. The December 14 pediatric emergency lane citation will not be dismissed, Judge Caprio continued, but it will be reduced to court costs only, payable at $10 per month, because compassion does not erase accountability. It completes it. Another quote, another line destined to travel. He wasn't finished. This court is also directing the clerk's office to connect Mr. Deluca today with the Providence Veterans Resource Network, Emergency Housing Liaison and Transportation Assistance Coordinator. Not tomorrow, today. Maria nodded through tears and scribbled furiously. Judge Caprio turned to Emily, and this young woman is going to school. Emily blinked, yes, sir. Good. Because if she writes essays half as brave as the letter she carried into this courtroom, somebody's going to want her. The gallery laughed and cried at the same time. Then the judge looked back to Frank one last time, and the whole room leaned in because everyone knew the final words were coming. Mr. Deluca, he said, a uniform doesn't make a hero. What you do when nobody's filming does, but listen carefully. Even heroes must let somebody help them, especially then. Frank's mouth trembled. He tried to answer and couldn't. So he stood instead, slowly like an old oak in wind. He looked at Rosa, at Arthur, at Angela, at Lily's teddy bear still visible in the evidence photo on the screen, at Emily. Then he faced the judge and said, in a voice barely holding together, I don't know how to do that. Judge Caprio smiled through tears. That, he said, is the most honest thing you've said all day. The room broke into applause. Not wild, not inappropriate, but human, spontaneous. The kind of applause people give when something sacred has happened in an ordinary place and they don't know what else to do with their hands. Officer Ruiz didn't stop it. He let it happen. Because everyone in that courtroom understood they had just witnessed something bigger than a ruling. They had watched a man who spent his life carrying others admit, finally, that he could not carry all of it alone. Drop a comment telling us if that would have made you cry too, because this was the exact moment the entire room changed. But the story didn't end with the gavel. The gavel came down softly. Good luck to you, sir. Case closed, technically. Emotionally, not even close. As people stood and began gathering coats, Angela Barnes crossed the aisle toward Frank with trembling hands. She looked like she was walking toward forgiveness and didn't know if her legs could survive it. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it, for him, for what my last name means to you. Frank looked at her for a long moment, then at Emily, then down at the floor. When he answered, it was another one of those lines that would have lived far beyond the courtroom walls. You don't owe for what you didn't drive. Angela cried harder. Then little Lily, who had been waiting in the hall with a courthouse volunteer, because Angela didn't want her inside for the testimony, peeked around the doorway holding that same brown bear.